Welcome back to Your 1230, the only podcast where our guests tell their story with the help of 12 questions in just 30 minutes. Today, we are really excited to be speaking with Shana Francesca. Shana is a speaker, writer, and entrepreneur. She helps people live more joyful and connected lives through the principles of life design. Shana believes our present and future are transformed when we infuse our lives with intention. We design our lives and realize the power in accepting ourselves as the author of our story. Shana, welcome. We are really thrilled to be speaking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Of course, of course. And before we hit record, I told you that I love that bio. It's really well written, especially the way that it wraps up the author of our story. It sounds pretty common, but I think if you talk to enough people, you kind of feel that they are just a passenger sometimes in their own life. How do you help people become the authors of their own story, or take that driver's wheel?
I think it starts with talking about it, right? I don't think we talk about what we want in our life, and I don't think we feel like we have the right to. I think most of us are just trying to get through the day, right? And so there's not necessarily time. We don't feel like we have permission or we have the space or we have the energy to sit back, take a deep breath, a conscious breath in and out, and say, what is it that I actually want for my life? How do I want to feel as I move through my life? What do I want the story of my life to be? When I get to the end, will this matter? This thing I'm doing in this moment, it feels like it matters so much. But when I get to the end of my life and I look back, will I say, man, I wish I had done this thing, or I wish I had done more of this thing, right? And when we can take a moment to like breathe into and be present with and talk about what we want from our life, I think that's the minute we start to be able to become more intentional about it and take that space as the author of our own story.
I think you hit on the two big things right there. It's that sometimes we're just focused on getting through this minute, this hour, this day, and then the things that we want, we may not even know that. So how are you helping people, the second part first, identifying these are things I actually want in my life as opposed to just, making it through this tough experience?
Usually we sit down and we have a conversation. We're talking about, how is it that you want to feel? What are the things, if there was no rules, if there was no budget, if there was no restrictions and no consequences, right? What is it that who would you want to be in this world? What would you want to experience, right? And we have those conversations and we start exploring that, right? Because, you know, again, I think we don't normally take time to like figure those things out, to really talk about and sit with those things. And I think it's critically important for us to consider, how we want to feel as we move through our life, and consider all of those things. And when we sit down and start to have that conversation, it starts to become clear, right? Because people realize I'm not judging them, right? I'm genuinely interested in the answer to those questions and I really want to know. And so, like, they'll start telling me things and I'll start asking more questions. And we start to go down this path, and it starts to be like, okay, so is this what you want? And they're like, yes or no, right? And I start to be able to see, especially when we do it in person, that's my favorite, but that's not always possible, right? Like we're recording this via Zoom because it's not possible for us to be in the same room quite as easily as it is for us to be through Zoom. But whenever possible in the same room, I'm also watching their body language. I'm also watching how they're responding to the questions, right? So that I can see how they're feeling into what they're talking about and see where their body's relaxing when they're talking about something, or seeing when it's tensing up. Like our body says so much that our words don't. And so it's such an interesting thing is watching someone's body language while we're having these discussions, because it's so very telling.
Again, you're absolutely right there in that trying to communicate that you're judgment free or that you're trustworthy is one thing, but when you stop, listen, pay attention to their cues, both verbally and how they are moving their body or how they are acting when they say those things, that's the
Yeah.
way to kind of show it and to have them open up.
Yeah.
And when you kind of describe yourself up front as a speaker, writer, entrepreneur, that's a lot of different stuff. How do you
Are
introduce
they
yourself?
different though?
Well, they are interconnected for sure, but
Yeah, they're interconnected because they're part of me. Um, So how I introduce myself is just that I'm the founder and the CEO of Consonate, and it's a life design company. I'm a life designer, right? But that doesn't, I'm defining what that means. I'm creating that conversation, right? And so it's not effective for me to say to someone, I'm a life designer, because they have no context for that, right? So really how I typically introduce myself is to say to people, the foundation of my work is intentional leadership and living, which is what I call life design, right? And I specifically categorize it that way, intentional leadership and living, because so many times when I say life design, people assume I'm talking about their life outside of work. They immediately subtract work out of the conversation, right? And they assume I'm talking about their personal life. But the reality is we are living while we're working. We hear these statements that say a work, we have to establish and work towards a work-life balance. That statement inherently implies that we aren't living while we're working, right? Because it's like a work-life balance, right? So there's no life while you're working. And it's because we don't feel like we're living while we're working, right? We live within a system that's constantly asking us to compete and give, and there's not much left for ourselves while we're working, right? And we have to really abdicate ourselves to succeed. So, yeah, I think, the easy way to describe myself is to try to connect with what people do understand. So, intentionality.
I'm going to try to follow up on everything there. That was such a fantastic answer because my mind exactly went to you talked to life design. It's like, well, must be more, we've talked before, but it's kind of like I want to help somebody live their best life outside of the walls of their employment. I didn't think of it, but you're absolutely right when you say
Yeah,
inherently work life that okay, then those things must be separate when if you just break down what they mean, they clearly are not, and it's a ridiculous thought to even go down that path.
yeah,
So I found when talking with coaches on either personal or professional that they certainly bleed into each other. But as you phrase it, that it's kind of a fool's errand to try to separate your life from your work. Are you finding that you're helping people take more enjoyment out of where they currently are in their careers, in their employment, or are they looking for what they might be more inspired in, so they're not looking
yeah.
for those lines of distinction? What's more common?
I think the reality is that there's so much blurring that has happened and occurs between our work, and our personal life, right? There's so much blurring work where our phone is a computer, right? So we're very accessible a lot of the time. So there is already a blurring of those things. And so to embrace it and to now recognize, okay, how do I show up for myself? How do I feed myself so that I can show up for my family, my friends, and show up for my work, right? The more that we take care of ourselves, the more intentional we are in our life, the more we can harness our energy for the things that really matter, right? There's so much that asks us and demands of us, like societal expectations, family expectations, friends expectations, but are they really aligned with who we are, right? And if we start with like basic things like boundary setting, but you can't set boundaries until you know who you want to be. You have to establish in some way, shape, or form how you want to show up in the world and be intentional about that so you can set boundaries around it, right? And like, so all these things kind of work hand in hand, um, so that we can feel more empowered at work and then we can take care of ourselves so that we can show up in our personal life and our work life. Like, it's all tied together because it all lives with us. It's all us, whether we're showing up for family or friends, we're always part of that equation, or we're showing up at work, we're always part of that equation, right? And we have to remember it all lives inside of us, right? So I don't think it makes any sense to separate our life into categories, right? I think it's disempowering.
You did not take much to convince me otherwise. So I see that for sure. Um, how did you know that you'd be good at this, or how did you figure out this is what I should be doing?
I was already doing it. So my background is I have a BS in interior design. And anyone who has been an interior designer will tell you that at least 70% of our work when you work with residential clients is therapy. Um, you're and maybe even more for me because I grew up in a very difficult household and difficult situation. So my physical environment I was very unsafe in. And so I very early learned just how powerful our physical environment is for our mental health and how we show up for ourselves and show up for the world. And that's what made me want to become an interior designer. But it also held this very like very mental health focused way of looking at interior design from the very beginning. And so, I was always curious about who people are and how to really authentically reflect them in their environment, not trends, not marketing, not what you see on social media, before social media magazines, right? I wasn't interested in any of that. I was interested in who they were and creating this exceptional collage of who they were, reflected in their environment. I was the mirror, and I was the person they were choosing to reflect back to them who they are in their environment, right? But to me, that meant I needed to get to know them very, very personally. And I did. And so there was this like very, very much this like coaching aspect of my work from the beginning. And then one of my clients, who's the head of neuroanesthesiology at a very well known medical institution and teaching hospital in Philly, um, told me, he's like, yeah, I tell everybody that you're my life coach and you're my interior designer. And it was at that moment that I gave myself permission to step into that role more fully, because I was already doing it. I was already leading group coaching. I'd been leading group coaching for 2.5 years, but somehow I still wasn't allowing myself to step into that role as a coach and call myself that. So yeah, it's been this interesting journey of where I started and where I got to now. And it really was just a matter of saying, you know what, I'm already doing it. Why not just embrace it?
That mirror description is a great example of, or a great way to kind of show that you are taking a genuine interest in who you're speaking to, and that you
Yeah,
are allowing them to kind of see what they want to see, what they should see, because you have that
yeah,
ability to connect. Um, is there a lot of people sometimes will have difficulty. You have a genuine interest in who you're speaking with. I think that's where it
yeah.
starts. But sometimes it's more than that. We hear be a good listener or ask good follow-up questions, and people kind of can struggle with that. Is there a
Yeah.
story to kind of emphasize or to illustrate how you're so good at that, or where someone can start? It's like, I'm trying to connect, but I'm failing some way. Or is there something that a story you could share with us that really will help someone kind of take that next step if they're looking to?
Yeah. So I was at an event and I was talking about life design and what it is. And someone approached me afterwards and she just was saying, like, thank you for talking about this. This is impactful for me. And I'm in the middle of a divorce and I moved into my own space and like, so thank you for talking about this. And she mentioned right as she was like kind of doing that thing where people are like kind of leaning away and kind of half walking away from you while they're talking. Like she was trying not to take up too much of my time. And right as she's walking away, she says, I have all these posters up on my wall and I know I need to take them down, and like, figure my space out. And I was like, hold on. Do you have a second? Can I ask you a few questions? She's like, yeah. And I was like, what are the posters of? She's like, concerts. And I was like, oh, have you been to those concerts? Do you love those artists, bands? Yeah, I love them. You're in the middle of a divorce. Were they on the wall in your house before? And the house that you shared with your soon-to-be ex-spouse? She's like, no. Like, okay. So could it be that the posters remind you of your wild, remind you of who you feel like you might have lost inside of that relationship? She's like, yeah, they absolutely do. And I was like, so let me propose that actually those posters should not come down off those walls. Let me propose instead that perhaps the switch that needs to be made is that you need to be more intentional about how they show up on the wall. Maybe they need to be framed and put together in a way that feels like an intentional collage, right? Or in a linear fashion, or whatever feels aligned with, if they're different sizes and shapes, maybe it's a collage, or if they're all the same size and shape, maybe it's linear, right? But maybe you just need to be more intentional about how they are and show yourself that you deserve to be honored within your own space, right? And it was such a light bulb moment for her, right? Because I did not enforce my will or my desires on her space, but empowered her to be able to show up more for herself, not less, right? Because it's her home. She lives there and she gets to take up that space, right? And that is just like, it's such a powerful example of how I work and what I do, because I can see people asking, it's like they're not saying that they're not saying they're asking me for permission, right? They're saying these things and they're like running them by me. And it's like, hold on, there's no running involved here. I need you to sit with this for a minute. Let me ask you some questions, right? And I think, also a foundation of my work is just genuine curiosity, and that's how we connect with one another. And anything we want to be good at, we have to practice. And curiosity and asking people questions is something that can be really vulnerable, and we can feel really silly asking something. But when we lean into that vulnerability, it's where we really truly connect and empower each other as human beings.
That story is perfect because it shows exactly what you want to get out of the person you're speaking with, that
Yeah.
you're asking the question, you're getting the answers that will help you get that insight. But the second part that you said, that you're looking to empower that person, or you're looking to kind of give them the ability to see things they can't see on their own, as
Yeah.
opposed to where I think sometimes we fall apart is that, let me tell you how, I asked a good question, you told me something, now let me tell you how smart I am, or let me tell you
Right.
how like I can take you to the next place. And that's not what you did in the story. And you explained it, that your goal is to empower that person. So I love
Yeah.
that example, and I think you're right on as far as ways to kind of take someone with you, or to show that you're genuinely interested, and
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
break down those barriers, whether they know they
Yeah.
exist or not.
Yeah. I think the most powerful thing we can do is be curious, right? Because we don't know everything and we're not meant to, right? And so, like, asking a really well placed question is one of the most powerful things I've ever seen, because we learn something and we connect with each other. I've never walked away from a scenario where someone talked at me and told me how great they were and felt connected to them. I have, however, felt deeply connected to someone who was genuinely curious and asked me beautiful questions, and we connected as human beings. And I may never remember what we talked about. Like Maya Angelou said, people don't remember what you say, but they do remember how you make them feel. And I have never been talked at and felt good about it, right? So if we're trying to make an impact, if we're truly trying to make impact, curiosity is the way, right? Not being an all-knowing being.
And that's a really good example, because I think sometimes you'll get especially when you're talking body language and
Yeah.
tone, it's like, well, the words don't actually matter. The words do matter, but
Mm-hmm.
where you're right is that when there is that connection, it's more of how I felt. Two people probably walk away and they'll summarize the conversation differently, but they're going to say,
Mm-hmm.
this made me feel this way, or I could do this, and that's why it went so well or so poorly,
Yeah.
or so that I agree with you wholeheartedly there.
Yeah.
When we started our conversation, you mentioned people sometimes at the end of their life will look back and wish they had done something, or done something differently, or have a regret. Kind of in that vein, is there a way that you like people to describe what you do for them, how you show up for them, when you're not around, and saying, Shana did this for me, and you need to know about it, or she was so
Yeah.
great because of this. How do you hope that people
Yeah.
talk about you when you're not there?
Yeah. I hope that people talk about how, and like, the fact that I helped them or empowered them or taught them or helped them to create practices around being intentional, right? So somebody asked me this just the other day, and I was like, if you just want to say that Shana, the foundation of Shana's work is intentional leadership and living, right? And do it in that order because of the way our brains work. But because it's impossible to explain in 10 seconds what I do, because we've been so wired and programmed to look at our lives in very specific ways, and I'm actively blurring the lines, right? But yeah, I would say that someone saying, "Yeah, Shana helped me live is helping me live my life more intentionally and connecting to more joy in my life." That would be like the per. Like, I also just I love listening to people describe what I do. I love that. It's my favorite thing. I love hearing their interpretation because it teaches me something about what I taught them. Right? Like, so I like that's how I would describe myself, but I really prefer that people find their own way to describe me based on however I impacted their life.
That's I like the way that you describe that there. Are you finding that a lot of your clients, or the people that you're working with, are you working with them for a long engagement, or do they feel that after kind of maybe speak with you a couple times, they're getting what they need, and maybe they'll circle back with you? What does that typically look like?
So typical engagement is at least 3 months. I ask, I kind of require, I don't kind of require, I require at least 3 months because because we're tackling long held belief systems and we're creating something new, right? And that takes time and it takes practice. Anything we want to be good at, we have to practice. And we need support in that practice because it's really easy to fall back into our habits. Typical engagement, though, is people engage with me, end up engaging for at least a year. And then after that, it's more like maintenance, right? So it's like 6 months to a year. And then after that, it's like maybe they attend workshops, maybe we check in once or, a month out of every year following, or one or two times. It's just like depends on where you are in your life and what comes up and how you're dealing with that. Because for all of us, right, we can learn certain concepts, and then we go through a whole bunch of things in life, and it's all of a sudden now we see those concepts in a completely different way, and we have to go back and look at them again, right? Like that's being human. Um, so yeah, usually people are engaging for at least 6 months, if not a year, and then then again it's maintenance. I'm not encouraging people to buy my services indefinitely. I definitely believe at some point you got to get into the world and start using it and try it out and fumble and fail. And my favorite thing is to remind people that failure is simply an indication that we've reached the edge of our learning, right? It's nothing more than that. And it's just a moment for us to then get curious again, figure out what we want to do, what direction we want to head, and learn more.
I want to follow up on the failure point. I think that's a really good one, but I want to get to a few other things that we should talk about. Just real quickly, though, you mentioned the length of an engagement. Are there any professions, personality styles, demographics that you found are a good match for you, or who should work with you, or who have you found that has been a good client and someone that you look to work with
Yeah.
going forward?
Um, if you're human and you're over the age of 25, I mean, I've had clients work with me in their 70s, in their 50s, in their 20s, or mid 20s. I don't focus on working with anybody under the age of 25. However, I do mentor, but that's like not a paid thing, obviously. But it's like 25 to 65 or is the typical range of my clients. And they're, especially in moments of transition, because that's when we realize how much help we need because something's changed and shifted and we no longer have our default ways of being to rely back on. But yeah, anybody who's looking to kind of redefine what does your life look like, to look at it a different way, because our life is entirely our perspective, right? And so if we want to change things, we need to start by changing our perspective and getting more intentional about what we're doing and who we're spending our time with and how we're spending our time. It's not about doing more, it's about being more intentional with what we're already doing.
So if you're listening to this, you're over the age of 25 and you're human, please contact Shana because
Yes.
there's something in your life that she can certainly help you improve. We talked a lot about the kind of coaching aspect, the entrepreneurial wing of what you do. And one of your clear skills is the ability to listen and have people open up to you with your genuine curiosity. I'm guessing, though, when you're speaking, one of the other things you do, it is tough to rely on that listening because you are ideally, or most of the time, the only one talking. So how have you prepared for that? What does it feel like when you get on stage? What's the different mindset
Yeah.
there? How are you tackling that?
Yeah, so I've been on the stage since I was a kid in one form or another, through dance, through drama, through being in plays. I taught drama for a while. I directed a play at one point in time, so I've been in and around the stage a decent amount in my life. Does that mean I'm really excellent at it? I'm really good at it. Is there still room for improvement? Hell yeah. I'm also neurodivergent, so I have to be really careful, um, about that as well, because sometimes, I forget and I'll get really like zoned in and I'll be paying attention while I'm speaking. And if everybody's faces go blank, I have to like calm my nervous system down. So I still have those moments like everybody else where like my brain just pays attention to the wrong thing, but I've learned through being on the stage throughout my whole life to like take a breath and move forward, right? And you find that one person or those two people or those 10 people, depending on the size of the crowd, who are like nodding and like engaging, whereas everybody else's faces are blank. And you just kind of ping between their faces and see if what you're saying feels like it's still landing. And, you know, you just kind of keep it moving. Like I've had this conversation, spoken at enough events, done enough workshops that I know it connects with people, right? And I know they're just processing, right? And so, like, when we're processing, oftentimes our faces go blank, which isn't helpful to me as the speaker, but it does actually give me information and give me feedback that people are connecting with it and they're just trying to process.
That's really good advice for the speaker. And as someone who's
Yeah.
guilty of sometimes having that blank face, I do understand that. I'm just
Yeah.
processing information.
Yeah.
I'm not dismissing what you're saying, I promise.
Mhm.
Uh, um, you mentioned being on stage, both performing,
Yeah.
dancing, directing. Do you have a favorite play or a favorite role that you were part of?
So I was a semi-professional salsa dancer for 4 years. And I have to say that performing in that way with some of the largest crowds I've ever performed in front of, some of them thousands of people. Um, there's Martha Graham said, "The body says what words cannot." Right, and there's something so incredibly connected to our soul between music and our body moving. And 85% of communication is nonverbal. So there's something extremely vulnerable about not being able to say a word, and it just being your body that's doing the communicating. And I would have to say that those are some of my favorite things. It's extraordinarily vulnerable, extraordinarily, because you're also syncing with other people, so people can tell when you mess up. You're not the only person on the stage. You're being compared to everybody else that's on the stage as well. So it's very vulnerable, but it teaches you so much about working together as a team and about what it is to be part of a community, because the salsa dancing world is very much a community. Um, Absolutely one of my favorite things.
It's a good answer. How how did you end up on salsa dancing versus other styles of dancing, other ways of performing on stage? How did you know this is for me, this is what I'm good at, and this is actually become a semi-pro?
Yeah. So I'd been dancing, like I said, since I was 18 months old, and I was too tall to be a ballerina and to do any formal like jazz modern. I'm 6'1". You guys can't tell that by looking through the screen, but I'm 6'1". Um, but there's something interesting about social dancing. I had never up until dancing salsa done social dancing. I'd grown up with all kinds of people in my life of all different backgrounds, um, every kind of different ethnicity and background, immigrants and people who grew up here, and the way that American culture melds with their culture, and then, just such beautiful things that I tried all these different forms of dancing, but there was something about social dancing that pulled me in, and not formal ballroom as much as like next dance I want to learn is West Coast swing, by the way, to anyone. But there's something about social dancing. There's an interplay. There's a conversation that's happening between two bodies, right? And and it's there's a lot of trust there. You really have to trust your partner because it's not choreographed. When you're social dancing, like when you're performing, that's choreographed. But when you're social dancing, it's not. You're both drawing on your expertise and your muscle memory. And as a follow, which is what I am, leads are telling you what to do with their body. And you are just having to go with the flow and trust that they're going to keep you safe on the dance floor, right? Like there's something so beautiful about it and the way that you interact that it just, once I did it, I was pulled in and I went all for it. I was within 6 months I was performing.
That's another awesome answer, and I could easily follow up questions with you all evening, but I won't do that as we somehow already at our time. I feel like we've covered a good amount of ground tonight. Is there anything I didn't ask you that I probably should have?
No, I liked your questions. No, I liked your questions. I think you asked really great questions.
We'll take it. Where can our listeners connect with you, find out more, or learn more if they would like to?
Yeah, so I always am hosting different, like a couple times a month, I'm hosting digital workshops or virtual workshops, same difference, or Zoom, virtual workshops, one on mastering intention, another on leadership. So those show up every month. So you can find those on my website. You can find my contact information. You can find, reviews and different podcasts that I've been on. Everything's there on my website. So that's the best place to go and check out. There's also free resources there that people can check out as well.
Excellent. So we will post links to all of that. Shana,
In the show notes. Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us. This was a lot of fun. I love the way that you kind of make complex concepts sound very easy to understand, and how you can really help all of us out there by being more intentional and understanding that if nothing else, life is part of work. You cannot separate the two. So don't say work-life balance any longer. So thank you so much. And I look forward to doing this again down the line.
Yeah, thanks.